Welcome back to the City Current Radio Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're honored to be with our next guest. We're talking about Hands-On Nashville, the power of volunteerism. We're joined by Nicki Avila. She's the AmeriCorps Program Manager. And let's start. Nicki, how are you doing?
Absolutely. I'm doing great. Thank you.
So you all do amazing work around volunteerism, engagement, even disaster response. And so we'll talk all about that, but let's start with a little bit of history and context. Give us some history and context, and especially around the purpose and mission for Hands-On Nashville.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hands-On Nashville is basically your local volunteer resource center. And we are actually celebrating 30 years of service coming up in 2021, which now we are in, which is such a crazy thing to think about. Our programs essentially connect volunteers to opportunities supporting around 200 plus nonprofits here in Nashville, including schools and other civic organizations. And we like to think of ourselves as helping those nonprofit partners maybe reimagine what the volunteer potential is in Nashville, and also bring awareness to those great causes and those needs that are out there in the community.
Absolutely. And, you know, when you look at, even in the face of a pandemic where I know a lot of it was shifted towards the virtual volunteerism, but the reality is nonprofits rely on volunteers to be able to power their mission and deliver the services and the programs and everything that they do. And so the work you do is so critically important to serve the community, to serve the nonprofits, but to mobilize this army of do-gooders that's in our community. Talk about that aspect of just normal versus pandemic and some of the kind of the nuances, the pivots, if you will, that you've had to undertake.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that has made it extra unique is that right before we went into lockdown, the tornado hit Nashville and hit many of our communities and the surrounding communities. And so we went from having this large explosion of volunteerism and volunteers in Nashville and all these opportunities to kind of, unsure of what the future of volunteerism really could look like and how to make the best impact possible on our community members and also just for those nonprofits. So I think pre kind of pandemic and shutdown, we were engaging, 10,000 volunteers a year even, and just so many people loving volunteering, both to connect with people that they'd never met before, or some people were using it to go on dates, which is super cute. A lot of people were doing it for their organizations as a community building. And it was just a really kind of exciting avenue that Nashville got to express, and for people to really get to know all the different things happening in Nashville and all the different ways that you could directly serve other members of the community in those nonprofits in Nashville. And so post-pandemic, kind of in the middle, I guess not post, but in the middle of this pandemic, we have shifted to both virtual opportunities. You see us posting a lot about virtual opportunities like Mask Now, and they are having members of the community create masks at home and then drop them off. So it's very safe and very contact-free, which is great. And they're delivering those masks all over Nashville and around the surrounding areas. Additionally, some other opportunities that we have are with our Geek Cause program, which is getting skilled technology volunteers plugged into other nonprofits, and it's something that they can do remotely and safely, and also really engaging and making a really large impact. And then I think the other thing to kind of mention is volunteer opportunities are still happening in person, but they are with masks on, with all the precautions necessary, and socially distant as well. So as disasters have kind of continued to be a theme in Nashville, unfortunately, and as the needs are growing in Nashville because of the pandemic, we are trying to reimagine how to engage those volunteers, because needs are still very real, kind of regardless of COVID or not, and because of COVID, unfortunately. So we are trying to keep our community safe and then also still meet those needs.
Yeah, and carry that forward, because I mentioned at the onset the disaster response side of this, because it is a big piece when you look at even right now, sadly, with the bombing and the rebuilding that's going to be taking place there. Yeah. There's still so much cleanup and caution and safety that needs to take place. But talk about the relief efforts as a piece of this.
Sure, absolutely. So Hands-On Nashville is often involved in disaster relief-led projects. We support the city in doing that. They're not started by us. We're not those heavy-hitting first-hand responders by any means, but what we can do is organize volunteers to go in and serve those needs. So we work with the city and the Office of Emergency Management for disaster relief. So I'll kind of go in chronological order of events. So we are still doing ongoing tornado long-term recovery efforts. Survivors are going to the Tornado Recovery Connection to get connected to resources and support, to request those needs, and then we plug volunteers into those opportunities. So a lot of it is still debris cleanup. A lot of it is helping survivors of the tornado either move stuff out of their homes and into a storage unit so that their homes can now be fixed by contractors as they're becoming more available. But still a lot of long-term tornado recovery. And as the time goes by, we're learning more and more what those needs are and how to serve them better through volunteerism. And then next is kind of COVID. So we're helping with COVID efforts in a few different ways. We partner with the Metro Health Department to provide volunteers to support vaccination stations for first responders and medical professionals, and now the elderly. We also provide support through volunteers for COVID testing sites, which continue to be a need in Nashville. And then now, because of this massive unemployment, economic downfall, and continued isolation related to COVID-19, we're seeing food insecurity growing rapidly in the community. So we're trying our best to support local nonprofits meeting those needs directly by connecting them to those volunteers. So some of those organizations include Conexión Americas, Second Harvest, The Store, Project Connect Nashville, 50 Forward, Youth Villages, and even the Nashville General Hospital. So as far as disasters are concerned, we are trying to support and provide relief as much as we can. And now recently with the Second Avenue bombing, we are trying to support the first responders there, connecting with the Community Resource Center to provide all the donations that came in from great Nashvillians. We're now trying to get them out to the survivors of the explosion and to first responders as they're needed. So we're now just starting to do cleanup in buildings that have been deemed safe, and that is happening this weekend. Literally, volunteers in Nashville are obviously a huge thing, so those opportunities filled up within 24 hours, which is just amazing and such a testament to Nashville really coming together in the face of adversity.
Yeah. Let's go back, because I like what you mentioned in terms of the reasons people volunteer. I think that's a powerful piece of this, because to me, volunteerism is the best way when you talk about meeting new people, getting to know your community, finding your purpose, connecting, and getting grounded in your community. And I think those are powerful pieces. But I love the fact that you brought up, dating and, just like some very simple things that when you look at volunteerism is really fulfilling to individuals based on all these different ways that volunteerism can be special.
Yeah.
When you look at the shift of in-person to virtual, and then, hopefully we can get back in person, give me one or two of your kind of favorite bits of advice when it comes to nonprofits kind of sharing that story of getting more volunteers, and just like you, like getting people to want to raise their hand to say, look, here's what's in it for you. I mean, everything's in it, but here's what's in it for you. So talk about kind of that side of recruiting more volunteers, endearing them, engaging them. What are some of your favorite bits of advice or tips?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a theme that we're seeing in the nonprofit world, and kind of like a buzzword, is storytelling. Instead of calling it marketing or outreach, we're now calling it storytelling, because really it is. It's connecting the community to the story of your nonprofit and why it's important and how you're making an impact, and how this thing, which can seem remote and isolated a little bit because of volunteerism being remote, how it really does connect to the overall mission and really does help you move forward in this hardship. So I think that is just ultimately something I say. Social media has boomed, and Instagram for nonprofit has also become obviously popular in the last 5 years, but really this year through COVID, everybody is going to Instagram for nonprofits to see what they're up to and what they're doing and how they're serving the community. And And I think it's even connecting them to the employees themselves. Hands on Nashville does a very, I don't know, it was one thing that made me want to work at Hands on Nashville, which is silly, but I love that we do pictures with our dogs and we post them on social media, or with our cats and post them on social media, you know. So I think storytelling through this lens of Instagram and really connecting volunteers and the general public to your mission, and also to you as a person, who's the human being behind the name of an organization, and then how are you guys impacting the community through your mission. So that would be a big tip that I would say. Additionally, people are wanting to know what the volunteer opportunity looks like. So as easy of a tip that this might be, really making it sound fun and exciting is half the battle, you know, letting them know that they can do it in their COVID pod. You know, how can you do this in a COVID pod? What makes this a fun experience? What makes it unique to them, or creative to them, or impactful to them? Can they get kids involved since it's at home? You know, that's a huge part of I think volunteering too, is doing it as a family, doing it as a unit. So those would be the tips that I have for engaging volunteers from the nonprofit side.
Yeah, and those are great. I love the idea of really illustrating the story and helping them understand the story and the impact and how that ties in. And then to your point, the educational side, if you will, on what it looks like, who can be involved, how their family can be involved, how their COVID pod can be involved. So all of that, carry that forward, because I think, you know, back to your point about storytelling, and especially with social media, empowering your volunteers, empowering your ambassadors and your team with, you know, here's what to share on a virtual event, a fundraising event. Here's what to share in terms of your volunteer experience and how you can help us share our story, and sharing pictures, like you mentioned. Small things of using your platform, your social media presence to raise awareness for nonprofits is a whole nother piece of this too, that I think really is powerful, that the more you can equip your volunteers to be storytellers, the more people you can engage, and to grow that influence for the benefit back of just the nonprofits.
Absolutely. Volunteers are your champions. They are the army that you can't have as being employed by a nonprofit. You know, we have so many nonprofits in Nashville doing such good work. They may have just one employee, they may have 3, 5, 10, and volunteers are really those champions for your organization. So the more that you get them connected to your mission, the earlier, the better. And exactly, that storytelling through social media, they'll take pictures while they're volunteering and talk about, you know, when people are moving to Nashville, and Lord knows we have a ton of people moving to Nashville, they're going to talk to their new friends about what organizations they feel connected to. And it might as well be your nonprofit. You're doing such great work in the community. Really feel empowered to kind of brag about that, you know, be proud and share that love with other people through that volunteer aspect.
What's something that you've learned during COVID that you think is going to, either for you personally or for Hands on Nashville, make you stronger coming out of this?
Great question. You know, I think through this very strange year, I have learned how much humanity there is, and how you can truly get connected to that humanity piece, that feel-good piece that lets you know that there are other good people in the world. And I think, especially right now, we need that connection. Being isolated and doing things virtually is making things so much harder, you know, but through this volunteerism, through connecting to other nonprofits, it's one of my favorite things about Hands on Nashville is that we don't have to pick one nonprofit to be passionate about. We can meet community needs that are across this wide span of Nashville needs. And I love that makes me feel more connected to this person that I've never met, that may be just down the street, that's also virtually volunteering. And people are doing such creative things to celebrate their volunteers and really bring that togetherness. So I think if nothing else from this very crazy year, one thing we're really learning is that humanity can still exist in a virtual space, and that it's just so important. And there's no community like the Nashville community. And I think we just keep proving that volunteerism spirit, I think, in Nashville.
Yeah, absolutely. Carry that forward into how we can help. So obviously our volunteerism helps, but how can we help?
Yes, absolutely. So Hands on Nashville makes it super easy to volunteer with your favorite organizations. We partner, again, with over 200 plus nonprofits. So one thing is that you can go to HON.org you can go to our little volunteer tab and there's a calendar. So it makes it super easy to organize by what your schedule looks like, your work schedule looks like. And then additionally, you can also search for keywords. So if there is a certain thing that you're ultra passionate about and really want to get involved in that, if you're involved with youth or education or food insecurity or social justice, there are those opportunities on the website and you can search them fairly easily. And I would just say, really consider how 2021 can be a year that brings us back together through volunteerism. And that is how you can make a huge impact. It doesn't always look like being financially tied to a cause, because I know that might not be an option for many people this year, but there are tons of volunteer opportunities that you can be involved in, and you can make a huge impact for these nonprofits.
Absolutely. So make sure everyone, HON.org is the website. Raise your hand, get involved, and make sure you check them out, HON.org. So Nicki, thank you for all you and your team do. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.